What's the crack, everyone? It's Nathan here, aka the Rambling Kern and head instructor of Kern School of Combat. So today's video is a bit of a rant, but also a bit of a important discussion, and one that I hope will kind of cause a bit of a discussion amongst my viewers and hopefully further afield as well. So I wanted to discuss the dichotomy that you see within weapon-based martial arts. Now, what does that fancy word mean? It means the two directly opposing contradictions that is weapon-based martial arts. And this is something that you used to see in a lot of traditional martial arts, but is now probably arguably more prevalent in weapon-based martial arts for a number of reasons. And I'll kind of touch on these as I go along. But what does that mean? And essentially what it means is you have kind of two schools of thought when it comes to training weapon-based martial arts. You have one school who wish to train and spar regularly in as safe and a controlled a manner as possible. And then you have a school who wish to train with as realistic a tool or weapon as possible, and as a result can't spar. Now, this is not to say either is wrong or right, it's just to kind of give you my opinion on the matter and how I have developed my own school of thought around it, and the reasons why I do the things the way I do. Should you do that? No. That's entirely up to you as what you would like to do, but I'm presenting my opinion of my experience in martial arts and what has worked for me and for others. Now, this idea was first introduced to me, unsurprisingly, by the Dog Brothers, but it's essentially the idea that within weapon-based martial arts, you can either train with a weapon that is realistic and risk potentially killing yourself or your opponent, your partner, or having a serious injury. The perfect example would be training with sharp swords. Can it be done? Yes. However, can you then spar in a realistic manner? No. Because you either need enough protection to stop that from happening, or you need to do your techniques in such a way that you can't apply a full amount of force because you're going to severely injure your partner. There's been numerous attempts over centuries for people to devise a way to do this, and all have had varying levels of success. Probably if you were to look at modern HEMA, for example, we have one of the closest iterations as to what that is. You have swords like this, a blunted sword with a blunt edge and a rolled tip. Now, various different types of tips that people have, but as you can see on this one, we have a kind of rolled over tip, and as a result, a lot of flex in the thrust. Also, if you have seen my video on my Nilo sword, the weight is much more towards the rear of the blade, so as not to be towards the front, so as not to be too heavy when you swing and hit your opponent, or your training partner, more importantly. So in modern HEMA, you have a whole array of safety gear to keep you safe and to prevent you being injured. That means you can spar with a relatively safe level, whilst applying a relatively high level of intensity. Now, the thing is, due to the equipment, you're still wearing a mask, you're still wearing padded armor, etc., etc. It can make certain shots difficult to gauge, and also it can make certain things difficult to know. A very simple example, shouldn't have put this down, but a very simple example is if you were to spar with a sword and someone hits you with the flat of the blade versus the edge. A simple thing, but let's say it's on the tip here, you might not feel that. Or it might just feel like a hit and you go, okay, that was a hit. In reality, one might cause damage, the other might not. Now, why am I ranting on about that? Now, there are still martial arts in the world who train various different styles of swords who do not spar for those kind of aforementioned reasons. They feel it is more accurate to train with the actual sharp sword that, with its intended shape and size and sharpness and so on, and to train with that and not to spar, because sparring, they believe, will create bad habits. Now, to me, I can understand that, but I also have some reservations when it comes to that. So my opinion on that is that if I was to train a weapon-based martial art and to not have some level of sparring in it, you as a result don't know if those techniques under pressure will work, or what you would need to do to make them work. And there's various different things that come into that, such as being injured or hurt in a fight and how to respond or keep yourself safe and so on and so forth. That's a huge topic in and of itself. But more importantly, you don't know if the thing you're training works until you are in a situation where you have to make it work. In weapon-based martial arts, that becomes even trickier, because obviously if I'm training to fight with a sword, it's unlikely that I'm going to be in a sword fight in my life. But I need to know how to cut with it properly and various different other things. But as a result, how do I train with that in an accurate manner? Now, obviously my channel is primarily dedicated to Irish-based martial arts, and many of them are stick-based. So to kind of bring that back into the realm of stick fighting, if we are to train with a weapon that we don't know if our techniques work or not because we haven't tested them out, and we can believe that they work, and we can say to ourselves, well, if I was to do X, Y, or Z technique, that would be potentially deadly, so I can't really train in a sparring scenario. And you'd be quite right. Like if I was to take this blackthorn, as you would have seen in my blackthorn various different testing videos, be it with the skull analog or the coconut, a solid hit from one of these could just absolutely smash a bone apart with great ease. So it's not something that you want to be hit with, especially hit with at full force. So obviously then we need some sort of analog to train with. And that's kind of, in my opinion, it would be like owning a gun and never shooting it. And then when the moment comes to defend yourself with it, not ever having shot it and hoping that it works and hoping that you know what to do with it. So then we get into the situation of, well, how do we safely spar with it? Do we go to the very, very opposite end where we wear a lot of padded and rigid safety equipment to keep ourselves safe, as well as using padded weapons? Or do we go as close to that stick as we can whilst wearing next to no safety equipment? And I think both of those are right. And that might kind of confuse people, because surely one is better than the other, and one is better than the other at different times of a person's martial arts development. And I think that's something really, really important to understand. When a person starts, and you will see in various different videos that I've posted on social media, and perhaps even some on my channel here, you will see padded sticks and padded stick sparring with safety gear on. Because when someone starts training with a weapon, there's two things generally happen. One, they're not used to hitting someone with a weapon, so they get very hesitant in doing it. A lot of people I've trained over the years act that way, because it's a weird thing to hit someone with a weapon. It's not something that we do with adults. Or, even as a kid, you're generally going to get given out to you if you do it. And then you have the other side of it, that you're not used to being hit with weapons. So either you don't really have any fear of it because it's not been done, or you're too fearful of it and you won't engage. So we need to introduce someone safely into that to then get them into the real thing. Now, even to liken this back to the likes of boxing, if we were to train, with our bare fists, obviously we're not going to be training that every day and like sparring our partners every day, because we're going to cut them up and hurt them really badly. So we need some level of protection. Now, MMA gloves, you might say, oh, we'll go with that. Still kind of the same issue. There's very little padding, and you might hurt the person. So we might go for standard old boxing gloves. But then you get into the situation of, well, I'm wearing a boxing glove, I can hit someone far harder than I normally would. I can do things that I otherwise couldn't do, such as covering up our head and using them for protection and using them in ways that you otherwise couldn't. And the same thing happens when we use safety gear and safety equipment, and I am the first to fully accept that. If you look at our sparring with rattan and minimal safety gear, rattan can still very much injure you. I have had numerous injuries from it, as have other people I know. However, it is probably the safest wood that you can use, not just due to its flex when you're hit with it, but also due to it not breaking in a dangerous manner. And that is a very, very important thing to consider when we're using a stick. So if we look, even historically, if we look away from swords, you will see even within the sword world, you had attempts to spar with little to no safety gear, and then you had attempts to spar with some safety gear, and then if we kind of fast forward into the Victorian era, you see a range of safety gear, and obviously you have modern HEMA with the almost standardized equipment that we have today. The same thing you see with sticks. Early on, people sparred with little to no protection, and then as protection became more readily available and understood, you started to see it being used. By the time we reached the Victorian era and into the early 1900s, and I'll bring these pictures up as I discuss them, you will see a lot of safety gear being used for the likes of single stick. Now, I think single stick is probably the closest example that we can look at for historical stick sparring in Europe that we have like a very clear and documented history of, and one where you actually see rattan being used as well. However, it was primarily other woods that were native to Europe, but rattan, there is examples of it being used. But you will see these people training in single stick wearing a good deal of safety gear so that they can train regularly and continue on about their daily lives and various different jobs. So this is an interesting debate, and it's one that I see come up a lot, but it's one that I feel is very, very important to ask yourself when you go to train a weapon-based martial art. Now, to touch on what I mentioned earlier, if we look at unarmed martial arts, boxing is a good example. If we look at arts that don't pressure test, in other words, they don't do regular sparring of various different levels. Now, that could be, like I said, for a beginner, that could be a very light level, and for an advanced practitioner, that could be like a fight or a full contact match, whatever that may be. If we look at more traditional martial arts, some have that and some don't. And if we look at the example of the early days of the UFC, now people will debate me, I'm sure, on this, but you did see certain arts thrive in that, as well as the early days of kickboxing, being introduced to Europe and America. You saw certain arts come out on top because they had that way of training. They had that pressure testing, they had sparring, and they had ways of ensuring that the techniques that they did worked. And that was through sparring. Now, of course, sparring is not for everybody, but it's also important to understand that there's levels to it. And not everyone will want to do all levels. Within my club, we kind of have 6 or 7 levels that we spar at, from our very, very beginners all the way up to our more advanced practitioners, to those who want to do other things. It's very important, I feel, to do that. Now, obviously, we still have to account for a level of safety because we can't risk permanent injury. We all have things outside of training martial arts that we want to do. But I feel it's a very, very important discussion to have when we train a weapon-based art of, do we spar, and do we spar in a realistic manner? Because yes, you can say, oh, I spar and we do our padded sparring, and that's great. It's definitely better than nothing, but obviously a padded weapon doesn't react in the way a stick would, and it's one of those things that you kind of need to understand. Now, there's also the interesting thing of a weapon such as rattan versus training with a hardwood stick. Like I've said, we have I have a video on why we use rattan, but it allows for minimal protection, which allows for the highest levels of understanding of what it is to be hit in various different parts of your body. If you then have to pad yourself, you lose that understanding. Now, people will debate me on that, I'm sure, and that's good. It's a good, healthy conversation to have, but it's important to understand if we can take shots on certain parts of our body, we will develop habits that perhaps aren't the best. For example, even just having a fencing mask on when you spar, you will take shots to the head, and obviously there's no risk of being severely hurt or having your face injured, so you might risk it again in order to land the blow. Not the best thing to do. And that can be the same thing in unarmed based martial arts. So, like I said, this one will be a bit of a rant, but I think it's an important one to understand, and it's an important one to ask yourself with the arts that you're doing. And it is a very important thing to ask yourself depending on what your goal for your martial art is. So like I said earlier, if you're training this art, or arts, weapon-based arts in general, if your goal is to train this for self-defense, I would very much advise you to train both with the thing that you tend to defend yourself with, and that might just be drilling on a pel or whatever, understanding how it hits, how it bounces, how it moves, but also sparring with a partner to whatever level you feel comfortable doing. Because you won't gain an understanding of what it is you're trying to do unless you do that. And I think that's the crux of the issue. And that is, from my opinion, the most important reason for why I train and teach in the way that I do. Not everyone wants to spar. Not everyone will feel comfortable doing it, and that's absolutely fine. I've said that before, it's absolutely fine. But if you wish to understand your art to the deepest level you can, I think it is a very important thing to do. And to do so, you will need to prepare yourself to train at the most realistic, manner possible. Now, what that is obviously always going to be up for debate. But in my opinion, you need something where you will risk potential injury, but you're not going to risk severe injury. And that's all martial arts that spar, I guess. So, a bit of a meandering video, but I think a very important topic to discuss, and I think this one might bring up a lot of discussion. Like I said, this is there is two camps on this. I can understand both. But I think the reality is definitely somewhere in the middle. You do need to both train with the weapon that you intend to use, and obviously train and spar in a way that you'll be able to understand what that weapon is and how it works. And I think stick fighting is probably one of the most interesting arts that we'll look at when it comes to weapon-based martial arts, because it is one where you may actually encounter it in day-to-day life. You might not exactly wind up in a sword duel at any time soon. I mean, you might, but it's a lot more likely that you might have a walking stick and be attacked, or someone might attack you with a stick, or so on and so forth. So if you're training for self-defense purposes, I think it's a very, very important thing to do to understand those scenarios. Now, there's always going to be people who say, well, I can't train my art because it's too lethal and too deadly, and I don't believe that. Yes, there are techniques that are dangerous, but if you don't have the control to prevent your partner being injured, then you don't really have the control to do them properly in a scenario where you need to do it. For a very simple example, if you take a powerful swing at someone, if you don't have the power to control and stop that should you need to, you're just going to overswing when you need to do it in reality and open yourself up for all sorts of bad stuff. So like I said, interesting video, interesting topic. I think this one will open up a lot of discussion, and would love to hear your opinions on it. Please do comment below, let me know what you think. Like I said, this is very much my opinion, and it's my feelings on martial arts and how they should be trained. I'm sure there'll be a lot of disagreement. I'm hoping there will be some agreement. But like I said, a lot of different people will have very different opinions on this, and not everyone wants to spar, not everyone wants to train in that manner, and not everyone wants to do everything the same, and that's perfectly fine. That's, the world is how it is thanks to that. But in my opinion, I think it is very important to pressure test what we do and to build our way up to as realistic a manner of doing that as we can. So like I said, let me know what you think. I really do appreciate everyone for watching. A huge shout out to my patrons. We've recently started a Discord, and I'll be doing requested videos especially for them. So if there's topics you guys would like to discuss with me, there's things you would like to chat about, ask about within the stick world, we're having great discussions on there at the moment, and I'm recording videos especially for them. So if there's things you would like to see, that's the place to go. And you can join for as little or as much as you would like. Every little amount genuinely helps. If you don't want to do that, just like, comment, subscribe, all the usual good YouTube stuff. It really does help, and the channel's been growing. I'd like to just really heartfelt thank you to everyone. This channel's opened up a lot of doors for me, and I really appreciate everything that everyone's given. Thank you all very, very much. Have a great week, and so on.